Welcome back, everybody, to the ARC Party. This is the fifth of six LitReactor archive episodes. In this episode, I'm joined by Taylor Houston and John Gingrich, and co-hosting with me is Josh Chaplinsky. And you get just a little over an hour of our discussion about grammar. These two have written articles for LitReactor about grammar in the past. We talk about what matters, what doesn't, and the impact of talking about grammar, and people getting salty about it. So it's a fun conversation. And once again, I'm just doing this so that the episodes of Unprintable, the LitReactor podcast that I did, have a home once the website shuts down. So here is our grammar episode, and I hope you enjoy it. All right, welcome everyone listening to Unprintable. This is the LitReactor podcast, and I'm the host, Rob Olson. This is the grammar episode. So in our previous episode, LitReactor's 10th anniversary celebration episode, we discovered that grammar articles, for some reason, were very popular and got big reactions from people. And so we decided, why don't we pull together some of the grammar experts from the website and talk about grammar and what makes it such a compelling topic. This episode pulls together two separate conversations. So one conversation I was able to track down and talk to John Gingrich, the infamous author of the most popular article on LitReactor of all time. We chatted a little bit about the infamy of his article, the impact it had on him, and then we also took a little bit of time to talk about some of his new nitpicks or things that didn't make his original list from that article. Separately, I was able to grab Josh Chaplinsky, the managing editor of LitReactor, as well as Taylor Houston, who is a longtime columnist and teacher for LitReactor, whose focus is primarily on grammar articles as well as teaching grammar to writers. So the episode's going to jump back and forth between those discussions. We're starting out with a discussion between Josh and Taylor and myself about grammar, and then we'll jump over to John and back and forth a little bit. All right, to kick things off, I just want to welcome onto this episode, the grammar episode, our two guests for today. We have the managing editor of LitReactor, Josh Chaplinsky. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
And I guess I could have come up with a more official title, but I'm going to go with LitReactor's resident grammar expert, which is Taylor Houston. Thanks for joining.
Hi there.
Taylor, since we've got Josh on the episode before and we've heard him talking about, the history of LitReactor, probably want to dive in and learn a little bit more about you for anybody who's not familiar. How long have you been working with LitReactor, and what has your main contribution been around grammar, or have you done other stuff as well?
It has mostly. When I moved to Portland back in 2010, I started going around on Twitter, following Portland writers, and I followed Chuck Palahniuk, of course, because that's who he is. And somewhere around, I think the summer of 2011, there was a call for people to start pitching articles for this new website called LitReactor that was a spinoff of Chuck's fan page. And I had just been teaching kind of a off-the-cuff class to people around for writing and stuff like that. And I thought, that might be interesting. I could, do some craft articles. And so I applied for it and got that. So I started right at the beginning with LitReactor back 10 years ago, which I can't even believe that. At first I did really craft related stuff. And then I think I did one in January of 2012 that was a grammar related, and it got a really kind of good review. People started commenting a lot more, and I got a lot more interaction because the first ones were supposed to be interactive. I put questions at the bottom, comment at the bottom how you, format your narrative. And it was just crickets. But then for some reason, the grammar thing just kind of got a lot more interaction. And so I thought, maybe I should do more of those. And then I just started doing a lot more of those anyway. And I'm kind of a technical person with writing too. So it felt really natural to move that direction. And a lot of the content I've done for LitReactor since then has been grammar related. And then I pitched a class to teach for them too, about a year after that. And I've taught, 20, 30 iterations of that class, it's a lot. Like I went around and counted like how many students and how many classes, and I just lost count halfway through, and I was like, whatever, it's a lot. So, and I consistently get people in there and consistently get engagement with grammar stuff, and it's amazing that people seem to hate it so much, but they really have a lot of things to say about it. So that's how I got here.
That's great. And I think that's going to be a topic that we talk about is like, what's the fascination with grammar? Because it's odd, like, cause I think it's strong feelings on both kind of poles of it. But, Josh, I'm wondering, because it came up, that like there seems to be more interaction with the grammar articles, or it seemed to be in that case. And then, that led to more. And we talked about John Gingrich's article that was the most viewed article in LitReactor history. What's from your perspective, any insight into what makes people care so much about this, or why it's what's a thing that people kind of gravitate toward?
Yeah, it's strange. I think people in general love to complain and nitpick, and grammar is kind of this safe thing to nitpick and complain over. I was watching the other night actually on HBO this new documentary. It's called 15 Minutes of Shame. It's the one narrated by Monica Lewinsky, the guy who directed Catfish, directed it. And, they interview a whole bunch of people, but they interview John Ronson, who wrote So You've Been Publicly Shamed.
So You've Been Publicly Shamed, yeah.
Yeah. And so, watching that actually, and, knowing this episode was coming up, it made me think a lot about the grammar thing, because one of the facts I learned watching that documentary was that the way the Twitter and Facebook algorithm works, it recognizes key words that express disgust. So if you write something and you type, "This is outrageous," "This is horrible," and words like that, the algorithm picks up on that and knows these are words that other people search for and react to, and there's more interaction with stuff that makes people angry than with stuff that people are happy about. And I think so part of it falls into that. And like I said, grammar, to me, it's an easy thing for people to get upset over, yet it's not super serious, but it could be treated like it's super serious. And it's something, I don't know, the layperson could claim, no offense to Taylor, could claim to be an expert in, although plenty of people aren't. I don't know, it's just, it gets people riled up.
Do you see that, Taylor, when you're in the reactions to your columns and stuff, but also in your classes that you teach?
Oh, that's a good question. Like, does it stay civil in the classes?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
It really does in the classes. The classes have been, usually by the time they've gotten to the class, they at least have admitted that they don't know something, which I think is where a lot of people get mad. They think they know something. They heard something once in a class when they were in high school or whatever, and they just like held on to that knowledge forever. But I think the folks in the class, they've decided, they've really admitted to themselves they don't know something and they can learn. So I haven't really seen much, like, no one really argues with each other. Occasionally people ask me questions about, something that they thought they knew, and is that true, and stuff like that. But no, it's pretty civil. It's like it's out in the comment land that people really seem to get upset. I remember the first couple, I think it was when the first class page went live, there was somebody on Twitter that kept like trolling me. There was like a typo in the class description. And they just went on Twitter and would just like at me all these comments about how it was wrong and all this stuff. And I think at one point I just wrote back to them like, "Hey, I don't know you. What did I ever do to you personally to to react like this? Yeah, it was narrow. We fixed it. Move on." And then they just stopped after that. It was very strange. But yeah, I don't get much of that. It was John's article, and I think there was another one that I think it was Rob that did one that was about nitpicks. And then I did one that was like words you're literally getting wrong. And those all kind of, because again, like you said, prescriptive, if you say this is right and this is wrong, that's when people really start to get fidgety and just like, oh, well, I always thought it was wrong and I've been using it that way for years. So because I've been using it for that way for years, it must be right. Or I saw it once in a book used that way. So therefore, if it was printed somewhere, therefore it's correct. And all other opinions are null and void. So I did, when I was in grad school, I taught like the freshman 101, like composition class. And I remember the mentors, like professors that helped us, grad students, they said, like, there's a really strong connection of identity and self in someone's writing. So when you're reading someone's writing, you're really connecting with who they think they are. And so judging that is where they feel personally judged. It's very hard to disconnect what you've written with who you are. And I think that there's a big piece of that in the grammar discussion, where if people have written something and it's wrong, you say that's wrong. They think, oh, I'm wrong. I'm bad. I'm stupid. But it's really, no, this is not, correct, or you're not getting your point across the way you want to because of this, that, or the other thing. And I think that's where people take it so personally, and it comes out of them. So they feel like they are the ones that are stupid if you say something that they've written is not correct.
That's interesting because I find a lot of, the grammar rules and stuff people argue over. Like I could understand punctuation and usage. I could understand people being so strict about those things because, technically, over time, I guess some of those rules do change. But for the most, you would like to think they're set in stone, especially when you first learn them when you're younger. You're not thinking, you're told this is the way it is. This is the truth. You're not thinking, oh, but this might evolve as I get older and different people might do it differently. So I could understand how people would be so rigid about that. But then to me, that also seems, I'm not sure I understand why people would have their identity invested so much in that kind of like cold, calculated usage aspect of it, It's not like necessarily style, which is a more personal thing. To me, it just seems like rules you should follow. And it's weird that people would identify so personally with a set of rules.
Well, they do think it's their style. I think that's where. So I don't really even tell a lot of people that I do this grammar stuff, because immediately I start getting things like on Facebook like, "Don't correct my grammar, Taylor," or "I know I didn't write that wrong, but I was just writing this." I'm like, it's Facebook, not I don't care. I do typos all the time. I type things wrong all the time. I'm not judging you. But it is kind of interesting how quickly the guard goes up if they think that I'm going around judging everybody's grammar, because sure not, and I don't want people to do it to me either because it's going to be bad. Everybody makes mistakes, and you have to like go back and think about it sometimes to get it right. I do think what when you go to school, it's like you learn all these things, right? You learn math rules and you learn science, like laws of physics, and you learn all these things that they kind of say this is how it is. And writing and grammar is sort of taught that way too, although I'd say it's not taught that well. Even if you learn like another language, so let's say you get French or Spanish class in school, you kind of learn all these rules for that too. So you think, okay, I've got these rules. But then you go out and you start seeing all of the, stuff that's written, and you're like, well, that's not right. How come this famous author can write it like that and get published, but it's wrong, or it's not exactly right, or different. How come the AP is different from the Chicago Manual of Style is different from, the Modern Language Association? what is a style guide? Why does anybody even care if you put a comma here or you don't? Or these different groups have different opinions of how to use certain rules or how to format certain things. And I think what I always tell my students in the LitReactor classes is that the rules are more like, they are guidelines, they're usage suggestions, there is a lot of what currently is happening in our culture right now as to, like, for instance, I think in the article I just did for LitReactor for the 10-year, they have they've put, non-binary genders into, AP articles and stuff like that. This is the thing that they added to their style guide to say, yes, we will do this. That's a cultural influence, right? To a rule book. That's not really rules. It's just, we've decided collectively that this is a good way to communicate things. And so now we're going to do it together as, journalists or whatever. So it isn't a rule like a squared plus b squared equals c squared, right? It's a stylistic usage and it changes all the time. And when you start to really look how people are using grammar to communicate with each other, it's always in flux. And so things are part of how we are communicating. That's just, it's who we are, what our backgrounds are, how we talk to each other, and how we want to be understood. So there is actually a lot of sort of our identity in there, but also we have to agree to kind of come to a consensus on how we communicate with each other. And so that's where grammar kind of crosses that divide between what I want to say and how I want to say it, and how I can say it in a way that you can understand what I'm saying, right? If we're coming at it with the same kind of format, that's why there even are style guides.
Yeah.
So that everybody in an organization or everybody in a profession says, okay, we agree that this is how we're going to approach something. That way we're not just all over the board. Because imagine if every writer that's a professional writer just comes to their job or to writing their books or to writing articles for the New York Times and they just go, I feel like capitalizing all, races, or all, I'm going to put commas every time I feel like there should be a pause here because it works for me. And then we don't have consistency. We just have, that person's communication style.
It's interesting that you mentioned the gender or pronouns, that sort of thing. Do you think, like, it seems now with the internet and everyone being so connected, that this current change in the language is very much spurred on by, social and cultural norms. Do you feel like, and I don't know how much of the history of this you might know, but do you feel like this is really the first time in history that it's been the culture has been such a force on the change or the evolution of language, or has this always been the way it's been?
It's always been that way. So I don't know if you guys know the grammatical rule that they say don't split an infinitive. So the infinitive is to, and then whatever the verb is. So to run. In English, we have two words, right? To, and then that verb, which is run. In other languages, the infinitive is like one whole word that's changed depending on who's doing that action, who's, like, he runs, they run, we run, those kind of things. So in English, there's been this rule that you can't split them because in other languages, you can't. It's not really something that we have to do in English because we literally do have two words, right? And you could put something in there. In other times when English speakers thought that they needed to align themselves more with like Latin-based languages, Romance languages. So if you go to sort of older English speakers, they often had their royalty were they either were French or they spoke French or they were trying to align themselves with that Romance language thing. They thought, we don't split them because you can't in other languages, so we're going to put them together. Another example of that is ending something with a preposition, right? It's totally natural in English to end a sentence with a preposition. It doesn't even feel wrong, which is why people do it all the time. In other languages, you can't, because they really are, they don't go together. And those languages would often be like a Latin-based language. And in English, we sort of felt at a certain time, people that were writing the books and caring about these things thought, hey, we should be more, our grammar should be more like, Latin or French or Italian, because we see ourselves as aligned with that sort of cultural push. So that was a cultural thing that just kind of stuck in there in the back, and people now don't even really know that's where it comes from. It's just there, and so it still feels like this. It feels natural to put those things in there, or write that way, or to put space in between these words that you couldn't do in other languages, because you can in English. English is not a Latin-based language. It comes from Anglo-Saxon. I'm not a linguist. I would love to just sit around and read about that stuff, but I'm always fascinated by how what we think of as rules and norms and usage rules are not. They're just this long line of thoughts and people's ideas about how we shouldn't use language. Now, because of internet and Twitter and all this stuff, I think we're it's not just a bunch of elites sitting around having these conversations. It's all of us. We can all get on Twitter and say what we feel about it, no matter what that means, no matter where we come from, no matter what our background is about it. So that's why I think it feels like we're all having the same conversation now, whereas in the past, maybe your average layperson has no idea why a certain grammar rule is. They don't know that it's culturally influenced by people that think that we should be more Latinized in our grammar structure for English. I mean, why would you know that? If you're a farmer and there's a bunch of, educated people who decided that this is how it's going to go in their grammar books that they, hand to each other at their own universities and whatnot. So that's why I think it feels like it is, but it's definitely not.
Well, I'm no farmer, but that's the first time I've ever heard that, and that's super interesting that's where that came from.
Yeah. Well, we're all farmers now. I mean, it's you could be anybody, but you can have a Twitter account, right? Mm-hmm. And people are way more literate on all levels of society than they were before. Even someone like Daniel Webster, he was an American. We all know of him as the American English dictionary guy, right? He's the one that really put that together. And he started doing that because he wanted to, he thought the way that English was taught in American schools was very inconsistent. Each sort of little school had their own way. And they had these really old books that had come over from England and stuff like that. And he didn't think that they were appropriate for this new colony that was kind of becoming its own thing. It wasn't an independent, place yet. It wasn't the United States yet. But he wanted to bring more consistency in those schools in the colonies on how they were learning language. So the first thing that he did that really actually got him notoriety at the time was create these learning books that he would give out to the schools. The dictionary came later on. And from that, wanting to teach writing and reading consistently through the schools in the colonies, he thought, okay, also we need to have some more consistency on how we spell things, what our words mean and stuff like that. And he proposed tons of these spelling changes that some of them took and some of them didn't. So color, right? If you go to countries that have more British style English, they put that U in there, COLOUR. He was one of the people that proposed that U is not doing anything. Let's take it out. And that caught on. But then some other things that he proposed, like getting rid of CH as a K sound. So spelling the word character with a K instead of a CH. So he thought because it was phonetically correct, K, but CH doesn't make sense, but it's still in there. People didn't really go for that. So it was still kind of this
that one.
Yeah, he wanted to spell mean, MEEN, right? That's phonetically correct. So he proposed all these phonetic spellings of things, and some caught on and some didn't for whatever reason.
So what this makes me think of, the talking about the cultural influence on grammar and how it's kind of always been a thing, but with the internet existing and I'm assuming probably one of the highest rates of literacy probably historically, right? Would that be we're more literate now than,
Sounds like it could be true.
I mean, probably. I mean, like, especially if you jump back a couple hundred years, we're doing better,
Yeah.
is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'd say we are.
Would so then my thought is, there's more of a level playing ground for everybody having more of a smarter opinion on how things should be done. So not that not that we should like Wikipedia grammar rules and everything, but shouldn't then people be more open to the idea that if there's um, a consensus on public usage, it should at least be considered, or something like that? I don't know. Just a thought that I had off the top of my head.
Well, I think it's interesting. So, like, I don't know, I follow like dictionary, Instagrams and stuff like that. And every year they say, oh, they added these 25 words to the dictionary, right? And they're all words that are really, really of the moment, usually things that have sort of come into our cultural, vocabulary in the last year or two. And that's because the dictionaries, that's exactly how they function. I wouldn't say it's democratic, but it's responsive, right? It's responsive to what's out there. It takes what exists and absorbs it. It's not prescriptive the other way around. And grammar really is that way too, but we don't think of it that way. We think of it as pushing out, like these are the rules, and then it goes out to people. But it really is responsive to the way people are communicating and writing, way more than we realize. And so I think that if we had that realization and we used it that way, people that do style guides and stuff like that do understand that, because they are actually going, if you go in Chicago Manual style, anything that they say is a way that they do it, they always provide an example. So they have gone out to real published articles and things like that and said, okay, it's used here and here and here, just the way we say. So that's why we're saying this is a good way to use it.
Right.
It really is pulling from the outside in. It's not the other way around, but we don't think of it that way.
Stepping away from the discussion with Josh and Taylor, here is John Gingrich and a somewhat epic story of joining LitReactor, writing a grammar article, having it go completely ballistic, and how it impacted his life. John, I think I want to start out our discussion with just reflecting on the fact that, first of all, you have the most viewed article in the history of the 10 years of LitReactor. And we know from our discussion with Josh and Rob on the previous episode that there was a little controversy around that. So is there anything you got to say about the overall reaction to it, and then maybe an impression of how it feels to be the most viewed article on LitReactor?
Oh, God. Yeah, it was it was surreal. It was weird. Just a bit of background. I was with LitReactor from the very beginning. They hired me in the summer of 2011, before the site even went live. So I don't remember the number. There was something like 500 people or something that applied for this job. And it was like me and 7 other people who got the gig. And so they hired me to write these columns on writing craft. And so what I would do is I'd write columns on everything from dialogue to descriptions to characters to POV. And I ended up doing in total about 36 articles for the site. I want to say between 2011 and 2013, something like that. By the time December of 2011 rolls around, I think I'd written about 10 articles for the site at that point. And I was kind of running out of ideas. And I just kind of came up with this idea of doing an article on grammar. And the idea for the article came from the fact that I've been an editor for a magazine now for about 16 years. At that point, obviously it hadn't been that long. And, it'd still been about, 7 years or 6 years or something at that point. But because of my job, I kept seeing the same usage and grammatical errors all the time, like over and over again. And this is where I think it's really important to just like lay out a really clear caveat here. Like, I'm not really a grammar guy. And this is something that a lot of people didn't know, and something I wanted to make really clear from the beginning. And I don't think I really did that. So yeah, sure. I edit a magazine, but people who specialize in grammar and usage, they're really punctilious, like I just got literally today, I just got the line edits back from my publisher for the book I have that's coming out. And they're just impressively detailed, these edits. So grammar and usage, it's not usually my wheelhouse, even though, for my day job, I am the editor of a magazine. It's just not something I'm interested in. And it's not something I really cared. I didn't have a burning desire to write about it. And so I came up with this idea. Well, I'll just do this article where I'll lay out some of the common usage and grammatical errors that I see over and over again at my day job. So that was the idea. And the article wound up with the headline, something to the effect of, 20 common grammar mistakes almost everybody makes. And my original idea, I wanted to call it 20 common grammar and usage mistakes almost everyone makes, because there is a discrete but discernible difference between the two. So, grammar is all about syntax. It's like the rules that govern how sentences are formed, and usage is different. Usage is using the right word. And as it turns out, most of the things that I wrote in the article are about usage. But it didn't sound too good, and I wanted the title to be a little pithier. So it just got kind of cut down to 20 common grammar mistakes. And that's one of the things that people ended up picking on me for.
No.
And the article was that they thought I was calling usage errors or usage mistakes grammar mistakes. So anyway, I put together this list, and when I wrote mistakes almost everyone makes, that's another thing that in a headline, headlines aren't very, they don't have like nuance to them. But what I tried to make clear was that these are things that everyone does, me included. A lot of them can be found in like Strunk and White, like the Elements of Styles, the classic grammar and usage book by, I think, W. Strunk and I think E.B. White's the other guy's name. And the rest of the examples I got from a book called The Careful Writer, which is by a guy named Theodore Bernstein. And he used to be the managing editor, I think, for the New York Times back in the 50s. And I don't even know if that book's in print anymore. I don't even think I own a copy anymore, but that's where I got a lot of the other examples I put into this article. So I whittled it all down to 20 common, again, I wanted to say at the time, grammar and usage mistakes everyone makes. And I put together this list, and it just takes off. It just, within a day or two, it became really clear first of all, to the guys who run the site, Josh and Dennis and Kirk, God bless his soul. He passed away a couple of years ago. It became clear to everybody that the thing just kind of went wild. Josh Chaplinsky got a hold of me, and it tells me what's going on, that this article is it's just circling the globe at a breathless pace. And I clicked on the article to see what he was talking about, and I just see page after page after page of comments. And some of it is praise, I guess. Thanks for writing this. Thanks for putting this together. I'd always wondered about the difference between may and might, or envious and jealous, or thanks for clearing up the difference between fewer and less and further and farther, and stuff like that. Those are some of the things that I put in the article. The difference between irony and coincidence, effect with an A and effect with an E, pretty common stuff. And it just kind of ended up railroading my life for a few weeks, actually, which sounds like a weird thing to say. So I've been writing articles for a long time, and like I'll write editorials for the magazine that I edit every month, and these go online as well as in the print magazine I edit, and a lot of them are really opinionated. I'll write pretty opinionated political articles, and I'll get some pushback. It does happen. It was pretty crazy how an article about grammar could really incense a lot of people. There were just people who were pissed off, and it was a pretty big teachable moment for me, actually. I learned something then that I just kind of carried with me to this day about how the internet works. It's an interesting thing that anytime that you're prescriptive about something and you write something where you basically tell people that they're doing something wrong, you can expect pushback to that. It can be pretty intense. the comments just started lighting up on this article, and I think I don't want to put words in their mouths. I'm pretty sure that the guys at LitReactor were pretty happy about that because it was getting a lot of attention. I wasn't so happy about the fact that people were looking me up online and finding my email and then sending me, pretty much the nastiest messages you can imagine. And I was just really floored by this because it's an article about grammar. And I would wake up every day and there would be, a dozen or more emails in my inbox. I mean, in hindsight, it's really funny. I never knew that something like grammar could really get under someone's skin so much, but I really did learn then that, again, anytime that you're prescriptive about something and you write something where you tell people that they're wrong or that they're making a mistake, I mean, that's just a recipe for you can expect a lot of opprobrium. You can expect a lot of pushback to something like that. The pushback was just really very strange to me. I wasn't expecting it, and it just kind of railroaded my life for a few weeks. Just to give you an indication, or just to paint a picture of how big the article was, I got recognized on the street for it in Manhattan.
What, really?
Yeah. I was going into my office on Madison Avenue, and I'm going into the building, and this guy behind me is coming in with me, and he stops me, and he's like, "Wait a minute." He's like, "Are you the guy who wrote that grammar article?" I couldn't fucking believe it. I was just blown away.
That's totally insane.
Yeah. In Midtown Manhattan, someone spots me on the street and asks if I'm the grammar guy. And this is how this ended up snowballing into this whole other issue where I never wanted to be known as a grammar guy. There are all kinds of people out there who are much better suited to talk about this stuff. I don't have the granular hold on grammar and usage the way that someone who works for like a major publisher would. It's the other reason why, it's the reason why I never really wanted to reprise the topic in another LitReactor column, much to the chagrin, I suppose, of the guys running the site. It just wasn't something I wanted to jump back into, especially after the really, oh my God, just the incredible amount of pushback that I got from writing this stuff. Some of the other responses that I got to the column were really funny because what people started doing was they started going back through my article and they tried to pick apart any word that I used to tell me if what I was doing was grammatically wrong or not, which is,
oh no,
it's really funny. I'm trying to remember some of the emails that I got and some of the comments on this site. Like, people pointed out to how I used a colon in one of the sentences. Someone pointed out to the way that I used the word alternative. The silliest one was a comment that someone put in response to the article where they pointed out that I used the phrase "I couldn't care less," and this idiot said that was wrong. That's totally right. I mean, I couldn't care less. I mean, that I literally could not care less. That's what it means. But again, they'll just try to find anything that they can to show that you're not living up to the same standard as the rules that you're prescribing. And yeah, it only kind of, it only kind of furthered my desire to never write anything like this again. But it was a really funny and weird and surreal experience. It is a very strange sensation to have every dork in America angry at you. It's
I can imagine.
It's really, really weird. And again, some of them said things that I think they had a point, and others were just needlessly angry. And I find myself, I found myself becoming really concerned about their mental state, that if grammar is going to set you off this much, what's the next election going to do to you? This is just very strange. Yeah. It was one of those things where, nobody saw this article taking off the way it did. I certainly didn't. And if I would have known that it would have taken off like that, I would have really taken more of a microscope to things. There was a teachable moment there for me in that regard as well, where sometimes I'll just write things and I'll just kind of phone it in. You're busy. I got 2 jobs basically, and I write fiction, and I teach my fiction class at Gotham Writers Workshop, and I've got a 5-year-old at home, and I got a wife, and I like to exercise and watch movies just like everybody else. So time is really kind of at a premium, and there's this impulse sometimes to phone it in, and you never know who's going to be reading and how many people are going to be reading. If I would have known it would have taken off like this, I would have spent a little bit more time with it, but I just treated it like any other article that I wrote. There was a teachable moment there and I've really taken it to heart since, that don't phone it in. Take your time. Take your time if you have it.
Well, it's nice that there's like some positive things that came out of it, I guess. But one thing that you mentioned is that you didn't want to be known as the grammar guy or a grammar guy. So this is kind of an opportunity to kind of distance yourself. This is probably like a timeless thing that you're always going to be, because even when internally talking about doing a grammar episode of this podcast, they were really pushing me to make sure we get John involved. So like, there's even kind of some of that going on, internally within LitReactor. But what would you say? Like you said, you have this this novel coming out. So is that like how would you define yourself to people as not the grammar guy? I am this guy. You're an editor. You're an author.
Yeah, I mean, I've been publishing fiction for 13 years, short stories. That was what I always did. I was always a short story writer, and I've been a journalist for 20 years now. I started writing, for daily newspapers when I was in my early 20s, and I became the editor of a magazine here in New York when I was 29, and I've had that magazine ever since. The magazine's called O'Dwyer's. So I've been writing for a long time. My novel is coming out. It's called The Appetite Factory. It's coming out in August through the Turner Publishing Company, one of their imprints called Keylight Books. I've been doing fiction for, been publishing it for more than a dozen years. In a perfect world, an ideal world, something like that would be on my epitaph, not not the 20 common grammar mistakes almost everyone makes. You don't get to choose what people remember you for, right? That's just life.
This is your infamy as opposed to like your personality or persona or whatever.
Sure. And you know what? At the end of the day, I'll take it because, after all, it is about grammar, for fuck's sake. I mean, it's not like I wasn't involved in some red letter crisis where, I did something horrible. There are people who are known for far worse things. I'll take it.
You're not going to show up on there's that HBO documentary thing that Monica Lewinsky did, 15 minutes of shame. Like you're not going to be on. You're not that bad. But
they'd be really hard for airtime if I was going to show up on something like that.
Jumping back over to our conversation with Josh and Taylor, let's see what we think about when it's okay to break the rules and why. All right, so this I'm gonna pivot us a little bit. And this is kind of the thing. So from my perspective, I did book reviews for 10 years and not necessarily much of a writer myself. So it's more of I'm taking in these words and this is how they have an impact on me has been kind of my interaction with writing in general. And so the thing that I kind of arrived at as a book reviewer was I was really focused on the quality of this is based on what was the author's intention and then were they effective in making that happen. And so that's kind of how I try to do my reviews, because it's like I need to understand what you wanted to do and then I want to see how effective was it on me. And so going back, and this was brought up earlier, there's oftentimes that someone is writing something and they're just going to die on that hill of this comma needs to be here, or whatever it happens to be. So at some point, there is a decision that's made to do things a specific way, especially I'm assuming in fiction, but probably also in, nonfiction, like opinion pieces, whatever it is.
to do something a specific way, whether or not it adheres to like these specific grammar rules. So that is my long-winded way of introducing the concept of like, how important is it for the thing that's written to have the impact it's intended to be over like it properly following grammar and usage rules and stuff like that.
I think there's a middle ground, but I definitely veer towards, you can break rules if you know why you're doing it. If you know why you're doing it and you've thought about it, and you have a good sense that your readers, your intended audience, will also be on board for that, then yeah, it's fine. There's not all rules actually make a lot of sense for every context anyway. So I don't know. I think that, yeah, they're totally breakable. They're totally like, you can bend them. I mean, great writers are good at this stuff all the time. We have these things where we go into these like craft classes and say, oh, you can write a sentence with just one word, give it a period at the end. Well, that's grammatically wrong, right? If I just put, boom and a period, like that's not, it's not a grammatical sentence, but we know what it means, and the writer is making a point by breaking the rule. They're doing it on purpose. They have a reason for it, and that's totally fine. All those grammatical rules, all the punctuation, especially punctuation, is there to help us understand the context, right? So if we're using it in a way that is understandable, like if I decide I'm going to end all of my sentences with question marks, that's not going to do anything, right?
I hate that book. I hate it.
Yeah, it's annoying. You're just annoying your reader. They're totally out of the element because they can't figure out what you're doing. They're like, oh, okay, this person is really avant-garde, whatever. Next, it's fine, but you're not helping anybody. You're not getting there. You don't want to bring your reader out of the story or out of your narrative because you've done something that's kind of way off. But if you've done something that's way off and you have a really like functional reason in the context of what you're writing, go for it. That's great. Yeah. That's what it's there for. That's why I think bringing a grammatical conversation to a mostly creative writing platform like LitReactor is appropriate, because when I go into classes, I talk about how this is used in their actual writing, because a lot of them are writing prose for, they're writing fiction and stuff like that. They're not writing a lot of technical stuff. They might be, but that's what they're doing. They've got a book or a story and they want help me editing themselves and stuff like that. And that's what that's for. One of my more popular articles is how to punctuate dialogue.
Yeah, that one.
It's like,
for some reason, that one was super popular.
And I still get email questions on that one all the time. And I incorporated it into class because it was so like, people just kept coming back to that. And it's funny because I think I put like 4 or 5 different ways to do it, because there is so many ways stylistically that you can put dialogue into prose that are effective, as long as you do it consistently and kind of you set up a certain way of doing it and then you follow that throughout. Totally fine. So I think all that stuff is there. It's a tool for you to use. Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, as far as breaking rules, I feel like anything in the pursuit of, your art or anything, that's creative, like anything goes as long as you're consistent with it, To me, that's different than you're just using bad grammar because you have bad grammar and it makes what you're writing unintelligible.
Yeah. And people that are newer writers don't necessarily know that difference. So that's, I think, where a lot of the personal stuff comes in. It's like they think, oh, well, I'm just deciding to. It's my creativity. And it's like, yeah, but you don't know why that works or doesn't work, because you don't know what a colon is used for or whatever. Like, so you don't know how to misuse it appropriately, right? If you don't know what the hammer is, then you don't know how to turn the hammer around. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Exactly. And it's funny that this was easy to talk about with prose. But actually, so my girlfriend is a copywriter, and every now and then I hear, little anecdotes about her work life and stuff like that. And she recently was telling me about something that someone on a team had written. And this person is just a marvelous technical writer, and they know all the stuff and they know how to do it right. And they write the most boring stuff because they write it the way that it should be written, but it's just got no soul or no kind of animation to it. So you can do everything perfectly and completely lose something or someone who's reading it. So even I think on a technical level, you still got to try and keep people interested, and that doesn't necessarily mean breaking rules, but it means making what you're doing, like giving it flavor or whatever. So I just thought even on a technical level, you can still suffer from maybe being too rigid about shit.
Taylor, do you think such a strict adherence to rules like that is kind of a herald of the old guard, that like the younger generation up and coming that's kind of been raised on social media and Twitter, they're less affected by bad grammar because they're used to people speaking that way and reading social media that way, people using, emoticons and like the letter U instead of the word U and stuff like that?
Yeah, I'd say that's probably true. I think maybe when you think about if you want to call it the old guard, like the early 20th century writers or teachers, what they learned versus what like kids now are learning, or I do think it is different, but I think that they just maybe don't remember that there was revolution in language then too. It's like this is ours now. They had theirs. There was one before that. There was one before that. Like, we're just in the midst of this one right now, and we do have all these new ways to communicate with our devices. Like, like I use like the little like GIF library all the time, right? It's like that's like that in of itself
Right.
is like a little communication piece, and it's part of a shared cultural understanding that's even in there, right? That there's this little GIF of some television character with some words on it, and if I put that out there, the person that put it in the phone knew that someone would know how to use it, and then I pick it out, send it to somebody, and they know what I mean, and I haven't written anything, right? It's just we're communicating on all these different levels, but I think that has existed before. It just was some other way. I think when we hear a lot of the these are the rules and you need to do it that way, it does come from this really specific point of view. And I know everybody always asks me about Strunk and White. So that there's like this,
right.
Do you guys know what Strunk and White is?
John Gingrich, when I talked to him, he referenced that as one of the sources he pulled for that big article that he wrote. So yeah, that came up when we talked to him.
So when I entered college, the very first thing they did was give me this Strunk and White book, right? It literally like says like, from Hamilton College to Taylor, welcome, because the college had this whole thing about being, that they were everybody there was good writers, and they had really strong writing skills and all this stuff. And they handed us this little style guide, and I didn't look at that thing not once in 4 years. Put it on the shelf, moved on with life, never looked at it. Managed to get through okay, just kind of, just writing what I think I knew in my head. When I did finally look at it in grad school, some of the advice in there is just straight up outdated. Like, it's like, yeah, okay. And E.B. White, the Charlotte's Web guy, he's the one that put together the book, and he put it together based on...
Oh, that's the same White?
Yes, and that's who White is. And he put it together on based on a one-page style guide that his professor, Strunk, had given him when he was at Harvard, like in the 1890s or something like that. So he takes 1890s grammar advice, updates it for, I think, the 30s or 40s. I can't remember exactly when Strunk and White came out. And then out it goes, right? And we're all supposed to sort of follow what's basically 100-year-old grammar advice.
Yeah, and I don't think that book's been updated since like the 80s or something, like the last edition that came out.
No, because everybody kind of like gave it to E.B. White and then just like left it there. And they're like, this is E.B. White's thing. A lot of it is good advice, but it is advice. It's not rules. It's literally just a little book of advice, just like the one pager that his professor gave him was advice for his class at that time in that place, right? So it was very specific. Can you imagine like someone gives you something for you to use or a group of you to use, and then 30, 40 years later, you take that and you like disseminate it to the masses, right? And then 100 years after that, everyone's still following that thing that you wrote for a very specific audience in a very specific time. So that's what Strunk and White is.
It's called the Bible.
Yeah. It was a lot more years in between. Yeah, 100% agree. But so I actually kind of just Strunk and White now because it's old. There's much better advice out there. There's good modern advice out there. There's a lot more than just that, and it's good, but it's incomplete, and it's just kind of like okay, if you really need a few things to sort of help you figure out how not to totally suck, like then go ahead. But I don't go back to Strunk and White that much anymore because there's other things.
So take that, John Gingrich.
Yeah. So I guess that kind of leads into the question of, we established that, rules are okay to be broken. It's best to know the tool before you decide you're using it a different way was something that came up. So if someone wants to just make sure that they're well versed in grammar and usage and everything, so that they're not just bumbling around doing things wrong, inarticulately, but they're using knowledge in order to kind of craft their style. What would you say are better ways to educate yourself? I mean, obviously there's different style guides, there's classes, there's just, I'm assuming, reading a ton. But what would you say makes a good kind of effort to be more familiar, to make a good effort to know grammar before you decide to abuse it?
I think that, not to pitch my own class, but that is really why I put that together, because there was nothing out there that I saw that was like an end-to-end picture of sort of all the major points of grammar, especially the 101 that I teach. I really thought there was nothing out there like that, because I never saw it. I looked for it. But there was a lot of, if you don't want to like pick up the Chicago Manual style, which is, it's a doorstop, it's huge, you're not going to read that end to end. I did it once and found that I was really stupid, and that's how I came to this grammar thing in the first place. I took a undergrad level journalism class when I was a grad student at Penn State, and thought I was going to get an easy A. Got my ass handed to me. It was a bunch of copy editors, and I was like, I am an idiot. I do not know this stuff at all. So that's where I kind of decided that I needed to teach myself and get better at it. But coming to schools, I think a lot of places where I find good sort of end-to-end advice is like the writing center for a college. So if you pick like a mid-sized university, usually all their stuff is online, like publicly. There's a lot of good, really practical advice in there. If you're going to like a bookstore or something like that, or you want to get on Amazon and order something, a lot of the books that they hand out to college students is good, because it's kind of an overview with everything. I know Mignon Fogarty, who does the Grammar Girl stuff, she has a book that has actually started been using in colleges that is a good sort of, whole picture, art, like book that you can go there. It's a good sort of reference, and you could read it end to end if you wanted to. I think that's good. I think also too, just like not being afraid to sort of look for the conversations about it, because if you look, there's, you'll see people who are, professional editors, professional linguists, professional like writers, and they will go on, and if you'll look on Twitter, there'll be like an argument about how to use some comma or apostrophe or whether or not to capitalize something, because it is really like based on context and all this stuff. And you'll see, oh, there isn't like a really hard and fast rule. So there's some wiggle room, and you'll start to understand like what is that nuance if you follow an argument between the two. Like I would use it like this because it means this, or I see it like that because when I see it used that way, it makes more sense because blah blah blah. So kind of looking for the conversations too, if you just want to like what is some of the what's that gray area, right? That exists out there. But if you want something that's like, I just need to understand better, like, what do I think is a verb what I think it is a, they have all these grammatical terms. I don't feel like I know what they are. I see them used, but like, if you had to, put a gun to my head, I wouldn't know what it is. Like, that's good. I think like that college sites and sort of stuff that's geared towards, new writers, or that kind of like those writing guides that they have. Because I go back to those too, just for really like straightforward stuff.
Right on. And your class.
Like that's literally the reason I put it together. I was like, I wish there was something else out there, and I looked around and I was like, there really isn't. Not that I've seen.
Okay, what would a grammar episode be without some nitpicks? So first you're going to hear from John Gingrich, some of his updated nitpicks that didn't make it into his original article. Then we're just going to transition right back over to Josh and Taylor to hear their side of it. John, before we wrap this up, is there any new additions to your list of grammar or usage things that that didn't make the list originally?
Sure. I mean, I figure if I haven't pissed people off this bad in 10 years, I might as well come back and, throw some more wood on the fire. There were a couple ones that I didn't add to the list that I kind of always wanted to. And I'll just throw some of them out there to you right now. I have to say number one would probably be the phrase centered around. That just doesn't mean anything. How can something be both centered and around something? It doesn't make any sense. So that's just not a phrase that I would advise using because it doesn't really mean anything. Another one, I see this everywhere. The difference between criterion and criteria. So criterion with the N, that's singular, one criterion. Criteria is plural, so that'd be a number of criterions. Here's one. I see this. The magazine I edit, I see this almost every month. We talk a lot about pronouns these days. Companies, they're an it, not a they. So you don't you don't say something like Facebook is known for their deceptive practices. You say Facebook is known for its deceptive practices. So companies are not a they unless it's companies plural. On the other hand, bands are a they. It's funny how that works, but bands are a they, companies are an it. So I see this constantly with the companies. Companies are always they in these articles that I'm getting. While we're on the topic of pronouns, reflexive pronouns. So you got like myself, yourself, himself, herself, itself, whatever. What reflexive pronouns do, they turn the action in a sentence back on the subject. So I fed myself, right? But so what you shouldn't do is you shouldn't use reflexive pronouns as a substitute for me or him or her. Like saying something like, he fed my brother and myself. It should be, me, not myself in that case.
Gotcha.
Okay, so here's another one that I see all the time. When there's a colon and what follows the colon is an independent clause, that sentence starts with a capital letter. You should start with a capital letter. When you have a colon and it's followed by a dependent clause, use a lowercase letter. God, while we're on the subject, this is one, again, I see this every month. It's constantly seeing this one. So if you have an independent clause and then what follows that is a conjunction and another independent clause, so we call that a compound sentence, you use a comma before the conjunction. So I went to the store, comma, but I forgot my wallet. So, I went to the store as an independent clause. I forgot my comma as another independent clause. There's a but in the middle. Put a comma before the but. So 2 independent clauses with a conjunction in the middle. Put a comma before the conjunction. I went to the store, comma, but I bought my wallet. but I forgot my wallet. But when you have a complex sentence, so that's an independent clause, and then that's followed by a dependent clause, there's no comma. So I went to the store and bought bread. Bought bread is a dependent clause. It's not a sentence. So I went to the store. You don't put a comma before and. So just little things like that. Those are my bugbears. Those are the things that rile me up the most. And then I've got just other little nitpicky things that don't really mean a whole hell of a lot to most people. Everyone's got their own nitpicky bugbears. The word over. People misuse the word over, or it suffers from overuse. You should probably use more than most of the time. So instead of saying over 300 million Americans, it's usually best to say more than 300 million Americans. I mean, over what? What are they over? They're not over anything. So it's usually more than. That's just about it. And this one isn't a grammar or a usage rule, but it's just a word that annoys the shit out of me. I keep seeing the word curate everywhere, and it just drives me absolutely nuts. The word curate, there's nothing wrong with it. It just suffers from overuse. So this is not a grammatical thing. This is not a usage thing. This is just, old man staring, and yelling at cloud kind of thing. The word curate just suffers from overuse. It's a cliche. And, like all cliches, it probably sounded great the first time someone said it, but it's just been worn down flat. It suffers from overuse. So there's no more life left to the phrase. The only people who should be using the word curate are like these bearded guys who run like an artisanal mayonnaise shop. Like they can have the word curate and do whatever they want with it, but it just suffers from overuse. And I just don't think you should use the word curate ever for anything anymore. I saw a sign on the street the other day that was promoting curated pitas. I mean, I just don't need, that pita bread to be fucking curated. It's just not necessary. It's just one of those things. There are a number of words you could use to much better effect than curate. And okay, I'm done ranting.
Cashed out on that one.
One more time with the word nonplussed. I saw this in a Vox article yesterday. I was reading an article on Vox, which is it's a good site. I mean, they have great writers there, good editors. I saw an article on Vox yesterday where they misused the word nonplussed to mean that someone wasn't excited or jazzed about something, which is just really strange to me. But again, just like nauseous, just like moot, a word will suffer from misuse enough times until we end up adopting the new thing. So, in 10 years, or maybe even now, I mean, for all I know, maybe you'll find in a dictionary nonplussed, it will say, to be unexcited about something, when in actuality, that's not what the word means.
That's crazy. The one that I've, my girlfriend I've been dating for about a little over a year now is a profession. She's a copywriter. And so now I find myself kind of in the crosshairs more often where, I'll say I'll do usage stuff often. And, one of the ones that I have really come around on is the, using fewer instead of less or whatever the fewer one. I was always not using fewer when I needed to. And, that one came around, but man, now I feel like the heat is on for me to use words the way that I'm supposed to.
Well, the checkout lines at grocery stores really haven't made things easy for anybody because they are always saying 10 items or less, and they're wrong.
Right.
So discreetly countable. That's what it should be there for.
Well, now that you've stoked all the fires again, I just want to give you an opportunity to remind people about your upcoming book so that when they read it, they can just dig through word for word and make sure they just needle you on anything.
Oh, God, the grammar is going to be awful. The book is called The Appetite Factory. It comes out August 22nd, 2022, Turner Publishing Company. I'm pretty excited about it. That's all I'm going to plug. That's my spiel. I'm not much of a salesman, but so that's coming out. That's it.
Awesome. Well, John, thanks so much for sharing your experience and your thoughts on some of the new stuff that has come up. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for talking to me tonight.
So I know this goes against pretty much what we've said, which is, there's a lot of this stuff is, advice and up for interpretation and blah, blah, blah. But I'm going to see if I can get out of either of you any specific nitpicks of grammar and stuff that just drive you nuts, Taylor, from a perspective of you see stuff all the time, or Josh from the perspective of you are the managing editor of a website. You're also an author. So you've got a lot of experience with that too. Either one of you want to take a crack at something?
I have one that I don't know why it just drives me so crazy. It's really not even that big a deal. But mostly just like putting apostrophes on things just because. So I'm sure there's always jokes on the internet, right, of how they've stuck an apostrophe somewhere that it shouldn't be there. But the one that really gets me is when they put an apostrophe on like an acronym or an initialisms like CEO. So where I work, it's rampant. I just have to just breathe through it when I see them because they'll be like, project manager PM apostrophe S, and I'm like, PM's what's the PM's what? no, they mean multiple PMs. That one I don't know why it just bugs me so much, and honestly, it's an honest mistake because I never learned that in school. It's not something that they're like, okay, grammar rule number 25. If you're writing an acronym, make sure you just put an S, lowercase s. That's how you make a plural in almost all cases. And in this case too, you don't put an apostrophe. So I don't know where the apostrophe came from. It's
People
there.
do that a lot with years too, with decades when they write the 80s.
Yes.
People always put the apostrophe in. And it was
Always.
only, not that long ago I learned that was wrong. And it always makes me feel good when I see it, and I'm like, nope.
It's so rampant. You kind of, even I was like, is it wrong? Am I misunderstanding something?
Well, one day it's gonna become right, even though it's wrong. Because if everyone does it, then it becomes right.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to do that, but there you have it. But yeah, that's one that really drives me a little crazy. I take them out when I see them.
As an editor, like when I'm editing stuff and I see honest mistakes or just mistypes and whatnot, like none of that really bothers me. That is what it is. There are stylistic things I see people do, and I've even toyed with writing a LitReactor style guide, but I don't want to put the effort in because there are a handful of things I see certain writers. I don't want to name anybody and shame anybody, and I don't want to give specific examples because then they might know, but there are certain things I see done stylistically that are not necessarily incorrect, but that just really irk me and I can't stand, and I change them every single time, and the writers still do them. But I haven't, I've never said anything. It's never irked me enough to be like, hey, stop doing this, So it's kind of a passive aggressive. I'm just going to change this every time I see it.
I think that's the right move. It's like this weird stalemate. You're just always going to be locked in this battle.
Yeah, but chances are they don't even know. They never notice. I mean, unless you're a maniac like me and go back and reread your article yet again once it's published, even though it's pretty much the same, you're not going to see.
Oh, I always reread them and I always find stuff. And I love that edit button because I have edited my own stuff after it's been published practically every time.
Yeah, that's true. And then whenever I write for someone else where I don't have that editorial access and I see errors after something's been published, it's always such a pain, and the turnaround seems so long to get it corrected.
Well, the thing that I've learned from talking to you two and also talking to John Gingrich separately is that there is no end to the conversation about grammar, but I personally feel very satisfied that the things that we talked about kind of align with my general feelings about the intention of words and everything. So not that I'm patting myself on the back that I'm right, but I feel good about the conversation, and I really appreciate both of you giving your wisdom to it. So thanks both of you, Taylor and Josh, for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, that is going to do it for our grammar episode. Thanks again to John Gingrich for coming on and talking about his experience with his grammar article. Thanks to Taylor Houston for sharing her wisdom from her long-time experience as a grammar columnist and teacher. And as always, thanks to Josh Chaplinsky for joining us as the managing editor of LitReactor.
Okay, and that was a fun little episode where we talked about grammar for Unprintable. That means that there's just one episode left for me to publish, and then I'll have everything up. And that is the 10-year retrospective episode of the podcast that I did with Rob Hart and Josh Chaplinsky, where they talk about the first 10 years of the website, some of the most popular articles, the origin of the website, the tie-ins with Chuck Palahniuk's website, a bunch of stuff. Good conversation, and it's nice little slice of history for anybody out there who maybe isn't aware of LitReactor, or a nice reminder for the people who have found it very valuable over the years. The next episode that you're going to get is probably going to be that 10-year retrospective, and then following that soon after is going to be the first 2024 horror preview episode that I recorded with Becky Spratford and Emily Hughes. That will be at the very beginning of January. Later in January is a nice little surprise.